Hello, everybody. Welcome to What Would Your Ideal World Be? A new podcast which examines many important people and the important things in their lives, what they think about most current trends at the moment, what they think about certain subject matters, and of course, what their ideal world would be. Today's guest will be Robert Aitken, who is a conservative commentator and pundit. He is best known for his books examining alleged left-wing bias at the BBC, of where he worked for several decades, with his most famous one being 2007's Can We Trust the BBC? His most recent book discussing this theme was 2018's The Noble Lair, how and why the BBC distorts the news to promote a liberal agenda from Biteback Publishing. Aitken was a previous guest on this show back in 2019. If you want to listen to that podcast, which also featured Winston McKenzie, the link is in the description below. Thank you for coming on. The main thing I wanted to ask you about, funnily enough, was in the last time we did an interview together, we talked about the whole thing about an article that you'd written for the Daily Mail back in 2007, suggesting that in order to combat sort of BBC bias and biases sort of like maybe the media at large in Britain, that we needed sort of like a British equivalent of Fox News. Now we have GB News, which is being hyped up as the British equivalent of Fox News. Have you seen it? And if so, what do you think about it?
Well, I've seen a bit of it, and I think it's still finding its feet, to be honest. So it's early to make a judgment, really. But of course, Andrew Neil, who's the guiding inspiration behind it, has made it plain that he doesn't see it as a Fox News. He sees it as opinionated but fair, and so not partisan like Fox. And from what I've seen of it so far, I would say that it has promising signs. So you are certainly hearing opinions on it which you wouldn't necessarily find elsewhere. So that is all to its credit and refreshing. I think really to be fair to GBN, I think that it's early to make a judgment, because setting up a station like that from scratch is a big task, and it has to be allowed to start to create its own sort of culture, its own broadcasting culture, and that's not done in an afternoon. So I think there are promising signs. Its technical problems have been much remarked upon, and I think we have to give them a bit of a leeway on that. They're still finding their feet. I mean, I like a lot of other people, I want it to succeed, and I'm reluctant to be too critical of it so far. Some of the stuff I've seen has been pretty limp, actually, to be fair. But I'm not rushing to judgment on it.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think about the news about that Andrew Neil, the figurehead, has taken I think it was a quick break or something, and has admitted to it having a rocky start? Do you think that bodes well, or do you think that's just a matter of it's just one major staff member, but it could continue on anyways?
Yeah, he's a bit more than that, isn't he? He's really the sort of he's the man who has more or less created GB News. I have no inside track on the reason for his departure, his temporary departure, but I think that it's probably just a question of burnout, is my guess, because there's been an enormous strain on him. Clearly, everything has revolved around him. He has had to formulate the whole idea and create the whole idea, and I'm sure that he has been under intense pressure, because he's not unlike his role for the BBC or any other broadcaster, where he would just turn up and the set would be there, he would walk in and do the interview. In the case of GB News, he's had to actually create the whole thing. It's a big task for anybody, and he's no spring chicken. He's in his 70s. I suspect it's just a question of burnout.
Hmm. And one thing I remember you talking to the guys at Trigonometry about, actually, the other one of the other major podcasts here on YouTube, was the fact that you felt that Neil was a social liberal, in your words, like, and you were a bit surprised when people thought that he was right wing, like the right wing dog at the BBC, pretty much. Did that make you somewhat nervous in sort of like the early days of sort of both the announcements and the sort of structuring of GB News, that you play a major figurehead, or do you figure that it didn't matter because there'll be other people working there?
Um, this is a very slippery topic in a way, because the the term right wing can be used, and is used actually fairly promiscuously to describe all sorts of people. So, for instance, you can have the mullahs in charge of Iran are sometimes described as right wing, um, because they're bad people. I mean, so the left uses the term right wing as a term of abuse, and it's a way of disparaging somebody. Um, Andrew Neil, to me, um, is somebody who is clearly a social liberal, by which I mean that I've never seen him take issue with some of the underlying cultural trends in Britain over the past decade or decades, plural. Um, he he seems to be wedded to the agenda which is put forward by social liberals on things like sexuality, um, abortion, um, assisted dying, all these things which are um, have a moral edge to them. Andrew Neil, I think, stands on the liberal side of that, if you like, the progressive side of those arguments. Whereas to me, social conservatism is it is in some ways resists some of those trends for very good reasons, and I don't think that's what Andrew Neil is. So as I say, it's a slightly complex picture. He's certainly, let's be clear, he is certainly a right winger when it comes to matters economic, and I'm pretty sure that he is somebody who is um, uh, someone who would broadly speaking support a party of the right, like the Tories. But there are many different types of right winger.
Hmm. And one thing also about GB News is the fact that in its first few weeks, there have been a lot of major boycotts of it by all these companies who have been caving into sort of the social media pressure mobs and whatnot. What wonderful lives they must lead, anyway. And they do this. All these companies boycott it. How do you feel about the fact that they boycott this channel, which is not particularly controversial? It's not like the Daily Storm or something like that, like an extreme channel or something. Like, how do you feel that they
Well,
do this?
I mean, it's. I thought it was very telling that, and it's. I think actually it should give us hope for this reason, because the the sort of people who are behind Stop Funding Hate, which I think was the moniker of the organization under
Mm,
which those boycotts were attempted. They're the same people who, a lot of them are the same people behind Hope Not Hate, which is another organization which pillories people that
wonderful.
it takes against. Yes, and you know, why would an organization like that try to silence um, uh, an embryonic broadcaster like GBN? What is it that they're afraid of? I think what they're afraid of, and this is true not just of those people, but of many people on the liberal left and on the left, they're afraid of the arguments which can be presented in opposition to their own viewpoint. So the the fact that they were so desperate to try to silence GBN before it even got off the ground, uh, tells me that they're afraid of open debate because, of course, they might lose that debate. And actually, I think if the arguments are fairly presented, they will lose those debates, which is why it's very important that you have a new organization like GBN, which is prepared to air some of those arguments. And it's something which our existing broadcasters, the BBC and Channel 4 and Sky News, none of them wish to go into that territory either. They don't want to see, or they don't seem to wish to facilitate open debate about issues which they consider to be too sensitive. To me, this is counterfeit. This is counterfeit broadcasting. It's counterfeit democracy. We need open-hearted and full-voiced debate about all these issues. And in fact, why has GBN come into existence at all? I'd say the main reason for it was because of the dereliction of duty of the other broadcasters. If they'd been doing their job properly, there would have been no space for GBN and no need for it. But Andrew Neil saw that type of broadcasting, those kind of debates were not being had, and that's where the space for GBN is.
Mm-hmm. And do you think another sign of hope is the fact that in its first few weeks it seems to have done very well ratings-wise? If I'm not mistaken, it's been Sky News at one point. I think it might have beaten the BBC, although I could be wrong on that. Do you think the fact that it has been I'm not sure ratings juggernaut, but rating success is a good sign that of things to come, I suppose?
Well, yeah, I mean, and I wouldn't, I'm not really persuaded by the ratings figures we've seen so far. I don't think you can stress enough that it's much too early, really, to be judging GBN. To me, the acid test will be, where is it in 6 months' time? That's the point. So if in 6 months' time it has established a decent and stable audience and is doing the job that it's set out to do, which is to have these debates, hear these voices that we haven't been hearing. If it's doing that, then it'll be on the road to success. But at the moment, I don't think it's possible to make that judgment. And I hope, I very much hope that GBN is a success. And we'll have to wait and see.
Mm-hmm. And the final question I wanted to ask you on this point is the fact that if it does do well long term, do you think it will convince other networks like the BBC and so on to up their game in terms of coverage and so on, or do you think they're so knee deep in their current structure and standards that they won't even bother and they just preach to the choir that they preach to right now?
That's a very interesting question, Edward. I mean, it's imitation is hardwired into broadcasters. So everybody is looking over their shoulder to see what the other guy is doing. And if GBN turns out to be a success, if it was a runaway success, for instance, if it was really making inroads, really getting big audiences and making waves, then I think that could have a big impact on the other broadcasters. One of the things about the current system we have in British broadcasting is that if the BBC is comparing itself with, say, who is it comparing itself with? Is it comparing itself with Channel 4? In which case, how does the comparison stand up? Well, they're both singing from the same hymn sheet, essentially. Similarly with Sky, it's got no one to compare it with, really. It would be very salutary for the BBC and the others if GBN was able to produce really good, hard-hitting, professionally produced broadcasting, which was making its mark in terms of public debate, because I think that really would make the other broadcasters sit up and take notice. And then you might well get a reaction on their part to start copying some of the things that GBN is doing.
Mm-hmm. And the next topic I wanted to ask you about is on the BBC, funnily enough, where you used to work and so on, and where you've written several excellent books about the subject matter and the bias. Um, what do you think, since our last interview, which was, I think, mid 2019, so like 2 years ago, the BBC has gotten better, has gotten worse, especially that there have been some signs of it sort of changing course slightly, whether it be the MASH report getting cancelled, that admittedly very awful comedy show, or I can't remember the current director general threatening to sort of crack down on virtue signaling online on Twitter accounts and so on. Do you think it's gotten better, or do you think this is just like window dressing for continuing as normal?
Um, well, I think that the most recent scandal to hit the BBC, the Bashir scandal, has shown up the BBC in the worst possible light. So, in terms of its public image and the trust that resides in it, I think things have got arguably worse for the BBC, because the Bashir scandal, in the salient point to me was the way that the wrongdoing had been covered up over 25 years, effectively, by senior people at the BBC. Now, for an organisation which constantly proclaims that trust is the basis of everything they do, we are impartial, we are independent, we are honest. This is a very bad look. And as far as the actual output of the BBC is concerned, to be honest, I haven't noticed a lot of difference. I think my own feeling is that one of the things you should say about the BBC, and one of the things which strikes me about the BBC is this, that there are very few people in the country, I suspect, who don't have warm feelings about at least one program that the BBC has produced, over time, whatever it might be, whether it's Test Match Special or whether it's whether it's a drama series or whatever it is. Most people, I think, have enjoyed at least one BBC program, and this gives it a great strength and depth. So people probably can't compartmentalize this argument in their own heads. So, oh yes, I've enjoyed Line of Duty, and then this Bashir scandal crops up. How do those two things mesh together? Does the fact that I really enjoyed Line of Duty outweigh the fact the BBC has been shown to be this corrupt organization when it came to the Bashir thing? It's a very complicated equation. It's not. I mentioned Line of Duty, which I think was actually a very effective drama series. And the BBC has been blowing its horn about that, but there's an awful lot of rubbish on the BBC as well. It does too much. That's one of the arguments against the BBC is it does far too much. It attempts to do far too much, and because it does so much, it spreads resources too thinly. Mm-hmm. So some of the material it produces is definitely substandard.
Mm-hmm. And on the Bashir scandal and stuff like that, when you worked for the BBC, you talked often about sort of like the biases that were going on there, some of the things that the presenters would say when no one was looking. Do you notice, you may have noticed sort of like the bias that was going on, but do you notice the sort of levels of corruption that plagued the Bashir scandal? Was it as bad when you were there in terms of sort of corruption as opposed to political bias?
Well, I never came across anything remotely approaching what happened in the Bashir thing. One of the things which I thought the most shocking thing about the Bashir scandal was the way in which there were two employees, two people on the Panorama program team who tried to blow the whistle about it, as you'll know. They went to the editor and said something's not wrong here, and they were disciplined, and their careers were blighted because of that. Now, an organization this is true of many organizations, that if you blow the whistle, if you say things which are unpopular with your bosses, this is not a recipe for career success. But it's particularly alarming when we're talking about an organization which is publicly dedicated to truth-telling and honesty. And yet, when those two Panorama journalists tried to be honest and truthful about what had gone wrong in the Bashir thing, they were disciplined for that. That's shocking, really shocking. Now, I never came across anything like that in the BBC. But also, the other thing to remember about the BBC is that it is a big organization and very compartmentalized. So I never worked for Panorama, and they were in a different building. I knew people on it, but it's it's very much it's very much an organization which is divided up into little fiefdoms, and they don't much interact with each other. I was on the Today program. Well, that's a world unto itself in many ways, as are all the programs, because the program teams are actually quite small, and then you have an editor who's the boss, and then he has line managers above him, but there's not much interaction between the teams in the different programs, if you get my drift. So I still think that what happened what has been revealed about the Bashir thing is truly scandalous. I mean, iniquitous behavior, really.
Yeah.
And anyways, yeah.
I'm sorry, you can finish. You finish if you want to.
Well, it's just that incidents like that cannot help but undermine trust in the BBC. And when you next hear the BBC telling you something dramatic or extraordinary, a number of question marks might be raised in people's minds. This is long term. This is very bad news for the BBC.
Mm-hmm. And on that, funnily enough, it's segued very nicely into the next question I want to ask: is that do you think scandals like that just fuel the fire a lot more for campaigners who want to abolish the BBC license fee? And if so, what do you think of that?
Well, funnily enough, I've just been writing about this very subject. The BBC is coming up for its centenary, so it's just about to complete its first 100 years. And it is a remarkable thing that it still has a funding mechanism which was devised for it at the time when it was the monopoly broadcaster. And so back in the 1920s, when the BBC was formed, the technology was, by our standards, pretty crude, and there was a great scarcity of wavelengths. So the European wavelengths were parceled out between the various countries, and in fact, the British allocation was a natural monopoly. That was, which is to say that there wasn't enough wavelength, there wasn't enough bandwidth for there to be more than one broadcaster. It made sense for there to be one broadcaster. So the BBC got that gig and was the monopoly broadcaster. The license fee is a monopoly form of funding because it's levied on everybody. It's a tax. So it's a monopoly. It's a sort of monopolistic type of funding mechanism. Now, there's a great irony in this, which is one of the arguments which is deployed for the license fee, in favor of the license fee, is that because everybody pays, everybody has a say. But actually, the exact reverse has happened. Because the BBC is insulated from the need for having to scrabble around for revenue, because it has this guaranteed revenue, it has got itself into a position where it simply ignores half the country and their views and aspirations. It caters very well for one part of the country, the sort of progressive, liberal, socially liberal, metropolitan type folks, they're well represented in the BBC, but other people are not. And because the BBC knows that its income next year is guaranteed, it doesn't really need to rectify that omission. So my feeling is that the license fee has had its day, and the BBC should now should translate itself into being a subscription service. I understand that can't be done overnight. It's not something that can just be done at the drop of a hat. But there's a review of the charter next year, 2022. The BBC charters run for 10 years at a time. The next one, or the current one, runs out in 2027. There's a midterm review next year. And I hope that what will happen then is that the BBC will be put on notice that the license fee, its days are numbered, and that the BBC will have to become a subscription service.
Mm-hmm. And this is probably the last question I'm going to ask you for time purposes. You talked about one thing before that. Was one quick anecdote is that even like Michael Portillo has admitted sort of like the fingers on ice. He was on Question Time a little while back and admitted this. One thing I want to ask in terms of like the abolition of the license fee. Given the fact that the government, if I'm not mistaken, have sort of scrapped any plans of that like a couple of months ago, do you think it's more of a case of? Do you think it is a popular thing to do, a popular sort of policy among the country, or do you think it's currently more of a niche thing among, say, certain think tanks and people like us, for example, who have objections to it? Do you think it's more of a minority or majority opinion about it?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think that the license fee bears hardest, in a financial sense, on some of the poorest. So scrapping the license fee, I think, would be very popular amongst a certain section of the population which perhaps doesn't use a lot of BBC services, sees the license fee as an imposition, and also finds 157 quid quite a lot of money to find. So in that sense, it would be a popular, even populist move. I don't think that, my understanding is, talking to people who are interested in this, in government and as observers of the broadcasting scene, I don't think that the idea of ending the license fee has gone away. I think there's still a strong possibility that will happen. One of the reasons for it is that, I believe that is because there is a substantial lobby in the Tory party. And we understand, we are led to understand that Boris shares this opinion too, that the BBC actually needs to be taken down a peg or two. And so, and Oliver Dowden, has, in fact, he in fact said in Parliament just a few months ago, in response to sorry, I was just distracted there.
No, that's fine.
There was there was a petition handed in. I think it was signed by about 160,000 people, calling for the BBC's license fee to be scrapped. And Dowden said in Parliament, in response to that petition being handed in, that that the license fee would be looked at, and that a subscription service was the long-term future for the BBC. Now, politicians say lots of things which then turn out not to be, not to come to pass. But I still think that, one of the big problems for the BBC is that fewer and fewer people actually watch live stream television. And we're in this this technological transition where people are moving more and more and more to demand, TV on demand. And that is a technological challenge for the BBC, clearly, because what it means is that people are drifting away from the old-fashioned BBC One, BBC Two, tuning in for the evening. They're going to something where they pick and choose, and that actually undermines, in a sense, the raison d'etre of the license fee, which was designed precisely to fund and support those sorts of channels. But if those sorts of channels are being decreasingly used by people, then that enters in another caveat about the future of the license fee.
Mm-hmm. And this is the final brief question I'll give you. So it's just a matter of who might be in charge of the Tory party at one time, because it's not going to be the Labour Party who's going to take it apart. It's just a matter of who's in charge of the country that matters on this question, I suppose.
Yeah, well, that's definitely true.
Mm-hmm.
So if the Tories stay in power, if they win the next general election, then I think the BBC, that certainly raises the prospects of BBC reform and reform of the license fee, which is the reform of the license fee is really the key thing, because if the license fee was scrapped in favour of subscription service, what that would mean would be that the BBC would actually start to have to think again about some of the way that it is engaging with part of the audience.
Mm-hmm.
So having a subscription, so having to fight for people's money rather than just being given everybody's money through the system of taxation, would make the BBC, I think, more responsive to public mood and to the voices of those who currently it is ignoring.
Mm-hmm. And that was my final question. And thank you for coming on once again. It was nice to see you in person this time as opposed to over the phone. And for anyone who wants to find your work or wants to know more about you, where can they find you? Do you have social media? I know you write articles in the Telegraph, for example.
Yeah. Well, actually, as we're talking, Edward, I'm just about to produce a film on the BBC about the BBC for something called the New Culture Forum.
Oh yes.
So you might know of it, and it'll be on there in a couple of weeks' time.
Mm-hmm.
And I recommend anyone who's interested to have a look at that, because there's some interesting stuff in it.
Okay, sure. Thank you very much for coming on once again, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like and share this video, as well as subscribe to the Ed Interviews YouTube channel, and also the Ed Interviews BitChute channel, and also look at my stuff on Mixcloud as well. I have more of this content coming in, and also subscribe to my Patreon subscribe star as well for more guest requests, as well as free copies of my old books. Until then, see you next time, guys.